Hey, let's welcome Michael. Thanks for having me here. Go ahead. I just want to introduce. Michael was excited. How many of you attended the Durandal with Rob? You did. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Cool. So that was my fear, was that everybody that had been in that one would be at this one. So the majority of us that were at that one were not at this one. So that's awesome. Let's see. My name's Michael Dudley. I'm a senior consultant over at Improving Enterprises just across the road. Been there for almost 2 years and absolutely love it. I work with some really amazing people. The kind of people that usually when I'm in a room with a bunch of our consultants, I usually feel like the dumb one in the room, which is exactly the place I want to be, is with people that I can learn and grow from, and so it's been a great experience. I have a small blog, I've only got 3 posts, but I have about 10 that I want to write, and I'm going to write those 10 posts. I will get them up there. So, so that Proven Style is my blog. But GitHub.com, that's the more important for what we're going to do tonight. GitHub.com/ProvenStyle. That's my GitHub repo, which is where all the code is. So you can pull that down. If you're interested, if you want to see more. There's a couple of other presentations on there about Durandal and JavaScript in general, jQuery, things like that. There's a knockout thing on there. So if you're interested, the one that it's Durandal 2.0 is the code base that we're going to look at. That's not what I wanted. Let's try that again. No. One more time. Yay. Okay, cool. So Durandal 2.0, I started working with Durandal back in February, and it was version 1.2 at the time. And so just recently, I think back in September, out to 2.0, and it's actually now like 2.01. He did a couple of bug fixes and stuff like that. But the title, Finally a SPA Framework That Works, was just born out of my experience. And I had this idea for a website that I wanted to create, and just started getting into it. There's such a learning curve when you're starting to do web development. Learning curve is huge. And I was weak in HTML, weak in CSS, and so I was looking for frameworks to help me out. And one of the first ones that I stumbled upon was IUI. I don't know if anybody's seen that. I don't recommend it necessarily, unless it's gotten a lot better in the last 3 or 4 years. But so I started playing with that, and the idea of the front-end UI framework was kind of cool, because IUI gave you things that look like a real iPhone. So like you could actually create like a contacts application, and it would look just like the original iPhone styling was, and that was kind of cool. But it didn't. Roadblocks. I hit roadblocks almost immediately, such as basic things, switching out pages. I was like, wow, if I can't switch out pages. So I got really frustrated one day, and I went to Google, because I always go to Google, and I just typed IUI sucks. And I found some blog where some guy said, man, IUI really sucks. What I found was jQTouch, and jQTouch is the way to go. And I was like, okay, yeah, take his advice, downloaded the code, started playing with it. And I got just a little bit farther with jQTouch, but not a whole lot. I still never created an app that I was proud of or wanted to ship. There were just too many roadblocks and too many hurdles. And so the next one that I played with was jQueryMobile. It was like an alpha release at the time. And I thought, man, if anybody is going to get this thing right, it's going to be jQueryMobile. Because they're jQuery. They've got jQuery behind them. And it was frustrating too. It worked a lot better. And I actually wrote a usable application. But I had problems. Stale data. So I would load pages into the DOM, and then I would go off to other pages and come back, and there were 2 instances of the same page in the DOM, and I was never sure which one I was going to hit. Because it's showing and switching out partial pieces of the DOM. So that was really frustrating. So to solve the stale data problem, I started using Knockout. And I heard some of you guys talking about Knockout before. And so, anybody use Knockout? Okay, so there's some familiarity there with Knockout. That was cool. That solved some of the data binding problems and some of the stale data problems, because all I had to do was keep my model up to date. But routing was kind of an issue. I had problems routing to the pages that I needed to, passing the correct data in, and keeping the state. What they call deep linking or deep routing, where you're actually going to a page and setting the state on that page, and capturing an URL, being able to bookmark that, and then in your single page app, return back to that. Just lots of problems. Brought in Sammy to try and solve that. Finally, I just gave up. That was the end. I was like, forget it. I want to do this. This is a real pain in the butt. So I went off and did some WinForms applications for a client, and that's like a sharp stick in the eye. So then I did some WPF stuff. WPF was a little better. But then they came up with this app at the client that I'm at back in February. And just looking at the requirements, it was clear that a traditional web application wasn't going to do it, because they had like 4 displays of video, and pull up 4 different video cameras, live streaming, switch cameras, using things like SignalR to update data in real time. And I was like, yeah, there's no way traditional web pages are going to do this. So let's drop back into the SPA frameworks and see what's going on. And the guy that I was working with, he said, oh my gosh, you got to see Durandal. It's awesome. This is just, and he was so excited about it. And based on my experience, I was really, really skeptical. I was like, yeah, another single page app framework. I'll get to it when I have time. And so eventually on a Saturday, I pulled down the code. I was sitting at a coffee shop, and I spent like 6 hours. It was a great afternoon. I was reading documentation, playing with the samples, and I remember tweeting some of the guys, or not tweeting, texting some of the guys I worked with that night, going, "Oh my gosh, Durandal's awesome. This one might actually do it." And so far it has. So that's why I call it finally a framework that works. There are other frameworks out there that work. A lot of people use Angular and love it. A lot of people right now are real excited about Ember. The Backbone people just thought that Backbone was the best thing ever. I was still kind of jaded at that point, so I skipped over Backbone. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. So February, started playing in Durandal. And we actually, that application we shipped in August, and worked really, really well for us. We're actually working on another round on that application, which we're going to ship in February. And my favorite thing I think about Durandal is I kind of forget I'm using it. So I get going. Most frameworks, I fight the framework. I have to dive down in the framework, find out, okay, what's it doing? Why is it doing this? Why is it behaving this way? For the most part, I just kind of forget that I'm using it, and it just works. So I was trying to figure out, so why did I have such a hard time learning web development? And this is the HTML5 group, so you guys know the pain of learning web development. And I kind of think of it as this convergence of frameworks, of technology, all driving together at that one. You have this idea of the web page that you want to build, and it's going to be awesome, it's going to be amazing, it's going to be a great user experience, it's going to look good. But oh my gosh, I got to learn HTML, I got to learn CSS, I've got to learn JavaScript. I haven't even left the client side yet at that point. At some point, I've got to learn Photoshop or some kind of graphic editor tool so I can do all the graphics and stuff. But then I get to the server side, and I have to start worrying about web APIs and see what am I going to use on my backend? Am I going to use C# or Java? Nobody was doing JavaScript on the server at that point. So there's just all of this stuff, and it was so frustrating and so hard. And once I started to get my head around that, then there were so many stinking JavaScript frameworks. Which one do I pick? Which ones work well together? Which one solves the problem that I'm having? And everybody's like pimping their framework, so that was really frustrating. So enter Durandal. So Rob was here just a couple of months ago for the 3 or 4 of us that were there at that talk. This is not his first front-end framework that he's written. So he wrote Caliburn, which is MV. What's the acronym? WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, an MVVM framework. And he was very successful with that framework. Some of the guys that I work with have used it on projects. But that was a thick client-based framework. But a lot of the principles that he learned in that, he was able to bring over to the web. And he did a really, really nice job with this framework. So what problems does it solve? these applications are complex. We talked about that convergence of technology. By the way, SPA. If you come up with a, Rob said this, and I agree with him. I actually went out and bought the domain name for Rename SPA, and I'm going to create a website where we can throw name suggestions out there and then tag other ones, and maybe we can rename SPA. Because SPA is just a horrible name for what it is. It's a single-page application, but then they get crazy with it. So like, there's this package called Hot Towel, and it's like, yeah, don't ever go to the spa without your hot towel. This is Hot Towel's kind of cool though. But anyway, that's beside the point. That's just another framework to get us sidetracked. So applications are complex. The SPA applications, the single-page web applications, and Durandal kind of tames some of that complexity for us. Good architecture with JavaScript is hard. This is not the JavaScript group, but everybody that does HTML at some point's got to roll up their sleeves and do some JavaScript. Y'all do a lot of JavaScript? Yeah. Can't help it if you're doing web stuff nowadays. So good architecture with JavaScript is hard. And then one of the things that Durandal does is it tries to encourage us to use good architecture. And if you follow their conventions and their principles, you end up with some really nicely architected JavaScript. Where do you talk about frameworks? So here's how Durandal solves some of those problems for us. So Durandal is built on really three main JavaScript libraries. So you've got Knockout, which handles our model and view binding. So it's just binding our data and stuff like that back and forth. You've got jQuery. jQuery helps us with all our DOM manipulation. I'm sure everybody does jQuery for the most part. Unless, anybody in that camp of no anti-jQuery? Okay, cool. I was wondering if I was going to have any jQuery haters. So there are jQuery haters who are like, no jQuery. We do it all.
It's the most used library in JavaScript.
It's what?
It's the most used library in the world.
It's the most used and the most abused, probably, because I've slogged through some really awful jQuery code. But jQuery is really cool at what it does. And so Durandal utilizes it heavily, and it utilizes it well, in my opinion. And then Require.js. Require.js is at the bottom, foundational to that good architecture. So Require.js, if you're not familiar with it, is just really, it's changed my life. It's changed the way I write JavaScript. It's kind of changed the way I architect my code. So I highly recommend that. And we're going to dive into these things more in detail here in a little bit. So MV star architecture, we can have our arguments over what that really means. Because you got your model view controller people and your model view presenter people and your model view model people, and then I kind of like the model view controller view model thing, but basically it's just model view separation. So we want to try as much as possible to separate our view concerns from our business concerns. It helps us do that even on the client side. Application lifecycle. The application lifecycle is absolutely beautiful. And what I mean by that, one of my biggest frustrations with some of those other libraries that I talked about before is, when can you start manipulating things? When can you actually, so jQuery solves the when's the DOM loaded problem. Yeah, that's not a really big one. But when you're switching out pages and you're doing this single page app thing, when have I got my data? When has the page been data bound? When can I actually start manipulating things in the DOM? When can I hook up my event handlers, using jQuery event handlers, things like that? Plugging in at the right moment for those things was very frustrating, especially with jQuery mobile, because it does so many things. So it's not just CSS, but it's actually doing JavaScript to transform your objects, and that was a nightmare. When can I plug in? So Durandal gives us this awesome lifecycle. It's kind of like, hey, can I activate this page? Can I deactivate this page? Page has been activated. I'm about to bind. Okay, I've bound. This page is, what do they call it? Activated, I think, is the event. That's like, okay, now I can start messing with things because it's been activated. But then there's another level of, is everything on the entire page done? And that's composition complete. So there's all sorts of different pieces where you can plug yourself into that pipeline. Make AJAX calls back to the server to go get data when your page loads, different things like that. So I think the application lifecycle is brilliant. Event messaging, so it does some like, this module over here can talk to this module over here by raising events, and they don't have to know about each other. that was awesome for SignalR, because I was catching, listening to that SignalR message and then just distributing it. And anybody that needed it could tie into the event system. Modals and message boxes. I actually got our UX guy excited about it because he was like, "Oh no, I do my own modals. I do my own dialogues. I got my own way to doing it." And started showing him some of the stuff that it did. Very, very powerful. So you can actually pass data in, get data back out, display custom views in these modal dialogue. You can even not just have the centered modal, but you can left-hand panel slide outs, right-hand panel slide outs, all sorts of really cool stuff there. Bundling and minifications, the last one. That one was cool. I didn't even realize that was going to be a problem. I had never got that far with one of these applications to realize, okay, now that I've got all this JavaScript nicely architected and all these little pieces, I don't want to have to download 75 files when I didn't have it bundled and minified. And I was like, oh crap, that actually choked my iPhone. So it worked fine on the desktop.
So are you doing the bundling and minification outside of the required, the amplify, compilation, run, stuff like that?
So under the hood, it uses that. So, foundational to Durandal is the Require.js. The tool that you bundle and minify Require.js is the R.js. And then they have their uglify tool and things like that change variables and minify things. So Durandal uses that under the hood. That's a pain in the butt to do the configurations, some of the stuff, specifying the files that you want it to bundle and minify, those types of things. So Durandal actually has this tool called Wayland, just a command line tool. And you run Wayland, it creates that Require.js config for you, and then it does all your bundling and minification. And it actually worked out really well. So my 75 server calls went down to 22 server calls, but most of those were images. And so I was like, come on, dude, make sprites. And so now he's working on creating a font library, a font icon library thing, so that we can minimize those calls even further. But yeah, so the bundling and minification works really well. And in fact, man, I haven't even got into the demo yet, but we're having fun. My wife doesn't like to listen to me talk about these types of things. She tunes out. So I sat down at the dinner table and she's like, how was your day? And I'm like, oh my gosh, let me tell you what I did. And it's like keywords, like if I mention HTML, or I mention JavaScript, or I mention dependency injection, or whatever, she just turns it off. So this is cool that you guys haven't turned it off yet. So this is what we do, right? We do code, we like to talk about this kind of stuff.
I have a question about bundling and minification.
Okay.
Can you do it from Visual Studio? Or it has to be?
Yes, you can.
Can you show it to us when you come to it?
Maybe. It's not in my demo. If we have time, I'll pull up. I've got a project. Basically, it's command line. So I added it as a post-build step.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So that would be great if
yeah.
you can do that.
Yeah, I can show you the code.
So does it have to be does the code has to be JS linted?
It does JS lint for you, and it'll show you the output. That's part of what the Wayland
Will it
tool
also
does.
will it do this simple stuff accept this, will it just move things around?
No, not that. Because you don't. So every time you build, maybe you want it. I really don't want to be bothered with all that stuff when I'm trying to build my project and create my minified stuff. And so the nice thing about the way we did it, we have a build server that every time I check in my code, it automatically builds on the build server. And so part of the script is it deletes the old bundled and minified stuff, creates the new one, runs all the tests and stuff against it.
That's what I want to do. So
Okay.
you
Yeah. So when we get done, anybody that wants to see that, I'll pull up that code and we can look at it.
I have a 5-second question on Wayland. So
Yeah.
does it handle the Require.js interpretation of shims that are required for libraries that don't support AMD?
Shims is a great question.
Yeah, that's always been a pain with Require.
Yes.
And there's no way around it other than just doing it,
Mhm.
researching Google and Stack Overflow and kind of stuff, finding out, Backbone originally didn't support AMD, now it does.
Okay.
jQuery does now, but libraries consume it down, so you have to, does it take any of that into account?
Okay, so let's talk shims for a second. That's a great question. I don't have a slide dedicated to it, so we'll just go ahead and talk about shims. So his question was, does the bundling and minification handle shims? What are shims? So in a little bit, we're going to talk about this AMD module pattern, where you create these modules that define your JavaScript code that does one thing. So this module does a task. but not every bit of JavaScript that we're going to be using follows that pattern. And so Require.js has this thing called a shim. You want to bring in a library that doesn't support the pattern, you just shim it, which basically wraps it in a module and allows you to use it. That is a pain. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't work well. There's a lot of problems setting that kind of stuff up. So here's my opinion, and it's just my opinion, but there's some people out there that I respect that agree with my opinion. So I'll just throw it out there. So I bundle and minify my code. So my application-specific code that I have to manage, I bundle and I minify that. And I'm a .NET developer, so I rely on Visual Studio to bundle and minify everything else. And so the definition, the way I think about it is, okay, I'm starting a new web application. It's not hard to get the foundational things in the right order. Most likely you're going to put jQuery in first. I think the only exception to that was JWPlayer. We ended up having to put JWPlayer in first and then jQuery. But then you get Knockout, Amplify, whatever things you're using, just those, it's a handful. You probably got underscore, at least I do, usually have underscore in there. A handful of third-party, I call them vendor-specific libraries. That's easy to get in the right order, no problem. So I rely on Visual Studio. ASP.NET MVC has a bundling feature that will bundle those 5, however many are. You give them a list and it bundles it. So I actually have 2 downloads. So the first call to the server goes and gets those bundled third-party vendor libraries. It wraps them all up into one, bundles and minifies them, all that kind of stuff. And then my second call gets my application code. And the reason I do that is for exactly what you're saying. I know that my code is written to play nicely with bundling and minification. I guess you could go through the trouble maybe to combine those 2 together if you were really had to get it down to 1 call, but I'm okay with making 2 calls to the server to get my stuff. The other thing that, well, I'll save that talk for later on when we hit that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that set well with you? Does that offend anybody? No. I kind of came to peace with it. So I worked really hard for several days going, dadgum, it's all going through Require.js and everybody's going to know. But when you see $, you know it's jQuery. When you see underscore, you know it's underscore. When you say KO dot, you know that's coming from Knockout. So there's not much confusion there.
I mean, I wouldn't disagree necessarily. I just haven't experienced the issues that we talk about using shims and setting up libraries. And it's generally pretty solidly tested things like jQuery or I just haven't had that experience with Require or Grunt using the config file for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the approach I've taken, and it seems to work pretty well.
In fact, my question was, why don't you use Grunt Bower type of frameworks to actually the deployment type of things?
So, because I'm a .NET developer.
So you see what you're saying, Durandal would work well when you're sort of using Visual Studio as your basic development tool. Is that a fair statement?
It works very well with it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work with Grunt and Bower. So on the Mac side, I've actually, so the way we work, we use Mimosa, which uses, I think it uses Bower and some other stuff under the hood. I have a Mac, but I'm kind of lost on the Mac side. I try to play in it just so I can, keep up to date. But so our UX guy is a total Mac guy. So he uses Mimosa to skeleton the application, and then under the hood, it's being hosted on a node server, and does that make sense?
Yes.
So and the code that he writes on the Mac side, he supports it right over to the
So I
PC
guess my
side.
question is, when you say this is a bundling and modification of a feature of Durandal, means somebody wrote and reinvented the wheel, trying to build bundling and modification, or couldn't it have delegated to a Grunt or a Bower type of?
Maybe. So he did do some delegation. He uses RJS to do the bundling and modification itself. He created
But
an easier way to
just
do
a
it.
compiler, isn't it? I guess RJS, I guess modifies.
But Grunt does that too. Grunt is
Oh.
it uses that RJS under the hood.
Right.
So there-
It runs
So,
components.
so that is simply
So there is one thing that I forgot to mention, and this is cool, and there may be other tools that do this too. But one of the cool things, it not only bundles and minifies your JavaScript, but it will bundle your HTML right along with it. Kind of tricky. Huh?
It'll do CSS.
Oh, CSS as well? Okay. I haven't thrown my CSS in there.
I
That's a third download.
I
So
don't-
vendor script, CSS, and then my custom
I
application.
don't trust it for CSS yet.
Okay.
Because it's a lesser stack.
So it does, we do use it to bundle our view. So all the view, all the HTML and our custom JavaScript come across in one download. It maintains white space and all that kind of stuff.
So like templates and stuff,
Yeah.
you may have separate template files and shove it into one template HTML file.
Yeah.
Is that separate from the index.html file, or are you talking about everything just gets shoved right in?
It just gets shoved right in.
Translates a template into JavaScript. Is that what you're saying? It will take the HTML templates and make JavaScript out of it. And so there's only one JavaScript download.
One JavaScript download, which contains all your modules and all of your views and a wrapper thing called Almond, which is a lightweight. Let's go on. This is great conversation. This is some good stuff. But yeah, let's go on a little bit and maybe we'll actually see some code. So at this point, what I wanted to do is just pull it up. So this is Visual Studio. I'm a .NET developer. Any other .NET developers? You're .NET. Okay. Yay! I'm not alone. I'm not alone. It does work on the Mac side, but so I'm going to use NuGet to install like the starter kit, and I like the starter kit. It gets everything wired up and going. So you can throw away everything you don't need. You can throw away the couple of views that it puts in. You can throw away the CSS. We have a UX guy that wrote his own custom CSS. So I'm going to do install package Durandal .starter kit. And if this was Mimosa on the Mac side, that's the only one I'm familiar with. But on the Mac side, you can say Mimosa scale new Durandal or something like that, and it does the same thing. It just puts together an application that you can actually just start up and run at that point. On the Mac side, he uses a node server to host it. Cool. So let's F5 and run. It's gonna break. It's not gonna work.
Where on your website do you get that starter kit? I'm trying to find it.
Do what?
I said where on your website do you get the new?
Oh, okay. So the starter kit, I pulled it in through the NuGet package manager. You can get it straight on the Durandal website. So if you go to durandaljs.com, I think it's .com.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think it's .com. Durandaljs.com. There's a bunch of downloads, and you can download the starter kit. So this is just a Visual Studio thing. It needs to know which controller to go hit. So, yay! So this is their starter kit, and just real basic. But what it did was it just wired up the fundamentals. He does this little demonstration where he goes out to Flickr and downloads some images. But we can already see the page lifecycle just right here. So when I try to leave, pops up a dialog. So this is the dialog, the Durandal dialog plugin, and it gives you the ability to intercept. So basically what happened was I went back to the welcome page and it said, hey, can I leave your page yet? And the page said, no, you can't leave yet. Why would you want to do this? Probably for like data validation. Hey, you haven't saved your form yet. All sorts of reasons to not let them leave your page. So if I say no, it keeps me here. If I say yes, then it lets me go on. So all this is just their basic application. Just get up and go. So with Durandal, there are a few conventions. So if you're going to use it, just accept the conventions. Just drink the Kool-Aid. Makes your life so much easier. It's that idea of convention over configuration. If you just do it the way they expect it to be done, then your life's pretty simple. So one of their conventions is that all your code is going to live in a folder. Just happens to be app at this point. You can change that. You can point it to a different folder if you want. But the convention is that it lives in an app folder. It has a view models folder. It only happens when you're doing a demo. I don't even know what Visual Studio So part of the convention is that you have a view and a view models folder. For small projects, that works great. So the project I'm working on, we have a handful of views, 4 or 5 view models to go behind those. So we use this convention. The other project that the other team that works out at our client, we don't use this convention. We actually use feature-based folders, where you've got this search feature where we're going. We do high definition video for police cars, so it's a lot of fun. That's kind of the domain we live in. So if you want to have your video search page, we keep that in a folder, and all the things that go with that. Video playback goes in a folder with its views and view models.
You mean as in like an app, instead of doing the app folder, you do the feature name as the parent
Instead
folder?
of the views and the view models folder.
Okay, gotcha.
So this way, like the convention is, this is my welcome view model. This is my view model that's behind my HTML. So I have a welcome.js, and then I have its pair, welcome.html. And so the convention is that you always create these guys in pairs. So for his Flickr page, there's his Flickr view model, and then there's his Flickr HTML. But it's easy to change those conventions. But if your app's small and you don't need it, I don't mess with it. If it's bigger, then I start to mess with it. So let's. One other thing. You probably want to know what gets it started. I come down here, and this is Visual Studio specific. So at this point, the initial view, your index .html or whatever, it happens to be an index.cshtml. And so this is where we define our head and all that kind of stuff. It's where we start to plug in different scripts, all the stuff we're going to download. But the key here is this guy right here, the application host. So within that, our entire Durandal application is going to be rendered inside that div. So we're going to switch pages in and out of that div, things like that. Ours has a header that stays consistent throughout the entire application. So we threw it in here. The things that we switch in and out, we use Durandal for. So this gets us going. It uses Require.js down here. So, projectors. Small screen space. Data-main. So this is basically the way that you tell Require.js, when my application starts, this is the very first JavaScript you're going to run. And the other convention that's obvious here is that file is actually main.js, but Durandal, because of the conventions, it leaves off those extensions. It doesn't say this is a JS file, this is an HTML file. It goes and finds them and knows how to find them. So that's basically just a little bit on wiring things up. But let's add another page here. So let's come into View Models. Once I have my application up and running and I want to add a new page, all I have to do, dang it, that was the wrong type. Add my JavaScript file. So I'll just call this my page. This is going to be very generic at this point. We'll get deeper in a second. Okay, so here's my page, my JavaScript file, and I'm going to come to my views, and I'm going to add my HTML file. And because of the convention, I'm going to name it exactly the same as well. That way they can find each other. Okay, now, Visual Studio tries to help us out, but we don't need all of this. I'll delete that. So when you're creating a Durandal view, these are partial views. So like I said, single page app, all the stuff's happening on the client side. We're switching these things in and out. So all you need is a container.
Does that container get dropped? So like the contents of it get thrown in?
No, it actually gets put in. It'll put an ID on there that it can use to track, so that it can later then go pull that back out of the DOM.
So you have to have a root node for that. You can't dump siblings.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Now, there's always somebody that's contrary, and so what's funny is that we were playing with this, and another developer is like, "Well, I don't want a root node. I just want a bunch of siblings in there." And so Durandal will actually, if you don't give it a root node, it'll recognize that and it'll wrap it. And so yeah, you can be contrary and not wrap it, but if you want full control on exactly what gets rendered, then you can just wrap it here.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm not a .NET guy, but I tried doing some of this Razor View templating before.
Okay.
And we had created a layout, an underscore layout partial.
Yeah.
That actually wrapped everything else. But .NET only identifies that if it's within, like in this case, MVC application 35 views, whatever. So when you do like an ampersand or an @ symbol HTML partial, it will only look at that directory. There's no way to direct it to look under your app view models or app views.
Gotcha.
Hey, is there a workaround for that? I mean, I've seen workarounds for it, but
Yeah.
they're really nasty.
Yeah. So that's a different topic for a different day.
Okay. I'll shoot you an email on it.
Okay, yeah. So there are workarounds with areas and things like that. We are using MVC, basically we're using MVC for that one initial view, that index.html.
Okay.
That comes out of MVC. And then everything else that we use MVC for is more as a web API. So
Okay.
we're not returning views at that point, we're returning data. Our login page is a straight up individual page. So whenever they log in, we log in and then redirect to the single page application. That's just how we chose to. Okay, so there's our view, and the other thing we need to do is come over to our view model. And so here's where Require.js comes in. So Require.js, again, gives us some patterns and some conventions to follow. But the idea here is that we have to define our module. And so to do that, we have this define keyword here. And then normally, you'll pass in a string array of anything that this module depends on. In our instance, we're not going to have any dependencies, so we'll leave that blank at this time. And then we have a function that gets executed, and that's it. Actually, that's not it. Your module has to actually return something. So I'm just going to return an object literal at this point. It's just an empty object. Once we start adding features, things like that, then we'll fill those in. So let's go over, let's refresh. Oh, one more thing. That's not gonna work. The next thing you have to do is just tell the application about your page that you just created. So I go over here to my shell JavaScript. Let me get rid of this guy. I need more screen real estate. And there's this thing called the router. And so when I talked about that, one of the frustrations that I had with the other frameworks was like things like deep linking. You know, how can I bookmark my URL, send it to somebody else, and then come back to exactly the same spot that we were just in? The router is the guy that takes care of that. So here, this first one, let's talk about the router for a second. This first one is the default route. So an empty route says, hey, when I first come into that application, if there's nothing in that URL, this is the page I'm going to hit. When we navigate it over to Flickr, there's our Flickr page. But let's add my page in there. So I'm going to call this my page. And let's see, what do I need? I need a comma here. And then I need to tell it where can he go find that page. And so I tell it where the model is. And so I'm just going to say, hey, go find my page. And that should be enough. Because our navigation up top is data bound. So there we go. So now my page showed up. This navigation bar up at the top is data bound to the router, which is actually really, really handy. Because you'll notice that there's some properties in there, like it highlighted it. It placed a class on there to call it active. Some things like that that the router plugin gives you. It's very, very handy. So now I can navigate back and forth. But we didn't really do anything, right? Well, okay, so we did something significant. We added a new view, and it was very easy to add a new view, because you just add HTML file, add a JavaScript file, and then tell the router about that. And that's all you have to do to add that new page into your single page app. But we didn't do anything fancy, we didn't do anything tricky. So let's do this thing here where our view model has a message on there. And we'll actually put the hello Dallas HTML 5 meetup. Is that good? Is that what we call it? Dallas HTML 5 meetup? Is that right? Okay. Cool. So let's return that on our view model, and then let's go back over to our HTML. And instead of putting our message here, let's data bind that message. So data-bind. This is knockout. So at this point, we're back into knockout. So the Require.js helps us architect our JavaScript. That was that module that we just defined. And now we're over in the knockout. So we'll do a text binding, and we'll bind it to message, and we'll save everything. And if I did it right, now this is actually dynamic data that's coming to us data bound to our JavaScript. So in a nutshell, that is the fundamentals of Durandal. So we can all go home if we want to. But I don't want to because I like to talk about JavaScript. So yeah, I wanted to show you guys. Let me find it here.
Got a quick, other simple question.
Yeah.
I've been following a little bit on Angular, and their demo usually has like a little input box that
Okay.
shows how to do like model binding to anything that you enter, and it's immediately reflected in like in the H2 or something right below. How simple is it to do that kind of stuff in Durandal?
Knockout. So Knockout handles that for us, and it's very simple. It has these things called knockout observables. If it's an observable, then when the JavaScript gets updated, the view gets updated.
Okay.
So that's deeper into knock. So here's my problem. Here's my dilemma. There's so many things I want to show you guys tonight, and if I really showed you everything that I wanted to show you, like was it you that asked about observables and stuff?
I was asking about
Computed.
custom bindings.
Custom bindings. So you could talk all night just about knockout. So I'm probably not going to show you that tonight, but we will do a little more knockout here in a second.
That's fine.
But if you want to, go to flashcards.provenstyle.com if you have a computer or a phone or whatever. So I've actually got this Durandal application up and running there, and
So, Michael, how does it handle things like their dependencies? I mean, I didn't see a package or JSON.
how does it handle dependencies?
So, when you're saying, you do require jQuery, let's say. Now you want to keep yourself on jQuery certain version, and typically in other frameworks you have a package or JSON that basically says underscore that version or greater than that version.
Yeah.
Symbol kind of.
So as a .NET developer, not Visual Studio, ASP.NET handles a lot of that kind of stuff for me.
So would Durandal not work without ASP.NET?
No, Durandal works with anything.
So how does, let's say, I understand how ASP.NET does bundling.
Okay.
I understand that. But if that framework is not in place, how would Durandal do it?
It just uses what you give it. It's not magic. So if you give it references to JavaScript files, it uses whatever you give it.
Or would you have to embed it in the paths or something like that in Require.js, would say paths, bunch of paths, and then you'll say vendor/version 1.8.2. Is that how it will work?
I would include those on my index page. So let me get off my Mac side and back over here. Any of those things that you're dependent on. What is that index? So whatever your index.html page, or whatever things that you are dependent on. So in my instance, somewhere, scripts render vendor.
Scripts starts Require.js, right? Now, what if the version of Require.js goes to 2.0?
Just like any other, it's no different. Just like any other web page. You can either change it or you can use some framework behind the scenes that will wildcard that and just pull whatever's latest, which is what Visual Studio and ASP.NET, that kind of stuff does.
Well, NuGet does for you.
NuGet will
You're
handle
talking about
some
package
stuff.
manager, right?
I'm sorry?
Talking about package management, right? Is that correct?
Well, so package manager will download, say, a version to your disk, right? And now you might end up having multiple versions installed on your disk.
Well, like with NuGet, I don't want to derail it, but you can stuff NuGet, for example, you can say update these to the current things, and they know what their
Right,
internals
so
are.
typically what you do is a project will have its own package or JSON. Will say, these are the versions I want to, use as dependencies.
Yeah.
And then there's a separate section called dev dependency that basically say how am I going to build this. And
Right. So in this is how I do it with Visual Studio. I use it. Forget Sammy right there. I guess it's being bundled. I'm not really using Sammy. That was version 1.2. I upgraded this from 1.2 to 2.0. So right now, ASP.NET will wildcard the version
Correct.
in bundles.
So I guess my question is, when this code infrastructure is not available to you, you would have to do this thing somewhere else for Durandal to work.
Durandal doesn't handle that for you.
Well, if I understand kind of what you're saying, like when you first started the slides or whatever, I set up using a template in my IDE. It just specified through my Bower.json Durandal. I didn't specify anything other than that, and it pulled in the other library, the dependencies that it required for it. So it pulled in knockout.
Require.
Yeah.
It did bring Require as well. So.
But that's tools like Bower and things doing that for us. That's not Durandal. Durandal doesn't try to do those things because, like you said, there's already tools that handle that kind of stuff for us. So, where was I? Oh, we were looking at our flashcard application. So, one of the first things I tried to build was a flashcard application. It was I had this Bible study at church, and we had these flashcards that we were carrying around for things we were memorizing. And I'm like, oh, dude, we should create an application to do this. And it was more challenging than I thought. Like, I couldn't do it with IUI, couldn't do it with jQTouch. I got it done with jQueryMobile. But then it turns out it was really, really simple to do with Durandal. And I thought it would make a good demo for us to kind of walk through. And so the idea is basically you just pick whatever deck of cards you want to go through. And it takes us through the cards. I can actually random skip through my deck. And then when you click a card, then it flips over. And that was the hardest part of that whole application, was just making it flip. So I had the idea in the shower one morning, and I was like, cool. So I started working on it. 3 hours, I had it done, ready to go, but it wouldn't flip. Actually, that's not true. It would flip in Chrome, but it wouldn't flip in Internet Explorer, and it wouldn't flip on Safari. And so I spent 6 hours the next weekend making sure that I could actually flip the card. So that was the hardest part of the whole thing. So this, if you want to pull it up and play with it, you can. But that's the application that we're going to kind of talk about through the rest of the presentation. So flip back over to our slides, keep me on track. Require.js. I think we've covered a lot of this. Fundamentally, Require.js is a module loader. It allows you to create JavaScript modules, and then here's the cool thing, and we hadn't touched on this. This is the part I said I'll catch later, is that it loads them in the correct order. Which when your application is small, that's not a big deal. But as you start pulling these features out into other modules and trying to architect them a little better, it becomes hard to load your stuff in the right order. So even when I was doing jQueryMobile, I had this set of JavaScripts that I was downloading my page, and then I would add a dependency in one script that wasn't loaded yet, and so they didn't break. And then I have to go chase down my dependencies, reorder my scripts. With Require.js, you don't have to do that. So you just tell it, hey, this script is dependent on this other script, which is dependent on this other script, which is dependent on this other script. And when it goes to load, it looks at its dependencies and starts with the first one that's got to load. It figures all that out, loads them in the correct order. That was magic. To me, that was worth it right there. Just to be able to include like one link. So all I have to do, drag my reference to Require.js and say, go execute this file, main.js. And then from there, it handles the rest. Loads everything. Yeah, it's really nice. And then when you bundle a minify, it uses Almond to do that same thing, because you don't need all the power of Require.js when it's bundled with minify. And Almond's really small.
Does it only use Almond? Or is that optional?
It's optional.
Because Almond doesn't support Asynchronous or lazy loading, I'm sorry.
So if it's all bundled and they're on the page, then that's not a big deal.
Well, it is, but unless I have like maybe 15 tabs in my single page application, and I initially land on tab 3.
Okay.
I don't want to load the others.
Okay.
Right until after the initial pages or the initial tab is loaded.
Okay.
Can you turn that on and off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the Wayland configuration, and also in the R.js configuration. So it's creating an R.js configuration, and it's R.js that's actually swapping those out. So you can turn that on and off. Great question. So here's the AMD pattern. So just to talk about it a little bit, we created one of these with our simple page. But the biggest thing is that, hey, right here, we're defining whatever modules we're dependent on. So in this example, my logger is dependent on a config file. That config file, in this example, is basically just enabling logging, turning it on and off. So in development, I have it on. In production, I have it off. But the asynchronous part, so AMD stands for Asynchronous Module Definition. And the asynchronous part is what Require.js does for us. Is it might, in this example only has one, but you can have as many dependencies as your module requires. So one-to-end dependencies. It's going to go trying to find those. Some of them it may have downloaded already. Some of them are still on the server, and it's got to go get those files. So that's where the asynchronous part comes in. Is it goes and gets all those files, resolves their dependencies. Once it's all resolved, then it calls our function, and then passes us arguments into those modules. That's when it's running on Require.js. The almond is a lot simpler because it doesn't have to mess with a lot of those things because it's already got all its files right there in that one bundle download. So this is how we reference Require.js on the page. We saw this on my index.cshtml, is that I just give a reference to Require.js and then data-main. So you end up using a lot of data-dash stuff when you're doing Durandal. So data-main is where we specify our entry point into our application. I started out with C#. Well, no, that's not true. I started out with VB6, but don't hold it against me. And then I went to Java. But at heart, I'm a C# developer. And when you create a console application, you get the static void main. And you know that that is the entry point into your application. And so I was always so frustrated with JavaScript because I was like, where's the entry point in my application? Well, it could be up in the head. Or if you're really good at optimizing your page, it's probably below the rest of your HTML. But no, you really need to wrap it in this jQuery document.ready thing, and there's 3 different syntaxes for that. You know, so there's just a lot of stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, where does my application really start? You know, where's the entry point? So that's the cool thing about Require.js is you get this entry point. This page starts at main, executes that script, and everything cascades from there. And I think it's beautiful. I sleep better at night because of it. So let's go look a little deeper at Require.js. It's 8:02. How late do you guys go? 8:30?
You can go on.
Whenever people start passing out or walking out, I'm just gonna load my demo here. Man, 16 gig of RAM, and sure is running slow tonight. I just don't get it. That's the reload. So the first thing I want to do is build. Just make sure. Yay, build succeeded. All right, let's run this. Get the web server spinned up and running. This is gonna fail. I want to warn you just ahead of time, and it's meant to fail, because then we're gonna fix the errors, and we're gonna see that even when it does fail, it gives us good error messages and things like that that we can use to debug the problem. So we're loading, and we've already failed. We've got 3 errors. So you're going to see where Require.js kicked in. My index.html page loaded, and then it said, hey, I need to go find this card.js. It's in the app folder, and it's in a subfolder called models, and it's looking for this thing called card. And the card is the model that defines our flashcard. So it failed there, and it also failed because it couldn't find the logger module. So let's go do the logger. The logger's a lot of fun. I like the logger. So I'm just going to come in here and build a Require.js module. Call it logger. Go. You can go away. You can go away. Okay. So one of the first things, what's the first thing we do when we're creating a module? AMD module?
Define.
Define, yes. Every one of them starts the same way. First, you define it, and then you tell it what am I dependent on. In this example, We're not going to have anything that it's dependent on. So we'll just go straight into this function. And we're creating a logger. And so we want to return, this is an interesting thing, especially coming from a C# background and Java background. So JavaScript doesn't have interfaces per se, so you can't like define an interface and then go implement that interface. It's all dynamic. You can do what you want. But this kind of reminds me of interfaces. So when I define an AMD module, whatever I return from that module are the public things that other modules can interface with. So I think of my return statement in a very simplistic way. I think of that return statement as my public interface. What are people that use my logger going to be able to do with that logger? Well, we want them to log. So this is just an object literal that we're returning. And now we need to go define log. Be a function. That function is going to take a message. So the simplest thing we can do is console.log message. So there's our logger. It logs our message. And now we go over and reload our page. Now we're down to one error. So it found our logger. Now it needs cards. But probably asking the question, that's a lot of trouble just to do a logger when we could have just done console.log and been able to log. But so we had this problem. We had to support IE9, and IE9 doesn't like console.log because when the developer tools aren't open, the console doesn't exist. And so when you're running IE9 and you try to log out to something with the console, then it just breaks. Then QA calls and says, hey, I got these errors. So there's this nifty little thing. That one. So basically when this module first runs, it goes and says, does my console exist? Is it undefined? And if any of those things, then I'm going to add this empty log function that does nothing except for log. And that'll keep it from breaking. So that the whole purpose of this module is compatibility with IE9. The other thing though that I found handy, because it's a SPA application and it's kind of long running, I wanted to do some other stuff. So I added this format thing to our logger, and all it does is put a timestamp on there. But that's actually really handy. So I can call format message. Now I've got a nice little logger module. That's compatible with IE9, IE10, works on Safari, works on Chrome, and it's formatted, so it gives me a time and date stamp, which is kind of cool because our video streaming application stays up for a really long time because they're streaming video out of police cars. So when things go wrong, I like to have that timestamp so I can kind of see where we were in the process. So anyway, that's our logger. But the other error that we were having is we didn't have a card module. So let's go add the card. File, I'm going to call this card, card.js. Okay, so look here. On this logger, what I returned was an object literal. Are you familiar with the term singleton, the singleton pattern? So singletons are like, no, use singletons, at least in .NET and things like that. Singletons are kind of cool when they're dependency injected. But my point here is that a singleton is you get one. And that one lives for the lifetime of the application. So when you use this pattern that we just used, when you return an object literal, every time I ask for the logger, I always get the same instance of my logger. And it just is, and it's kind of fun. You can do some nice tricks on the JavaScript side when you have a singleton that lives for the lifetime of your application. Such as streaming video. Which 4 videos did they select on this page way over here? Well, I have a selected video module, and its sole purpose in life is to remember what they selected way over here, so that when I get onto another page, I can just go say, hey, what did they select? And I can use that. Use it wisely. But I like that pattern. So, on cards though, we're going to do something different. First thing we do whenever we do a module is we define it. But what we want to do in this one, and I'm going to show you guys another syntax. So you've had enough of the full array, whatever. There are some other syntax here that we can use. So if you don't have any dependencies, you can skip the array of dependencies, which is a nice little feature. So what we're going to do is we are going to say var card equals function. We're going to create a constructor function. Our constructor function, what all do we need on that guy? I want to make sure I just get them in the right order.
Lift up your dependencies.
On purpose.
Okay.
So and what I said was that there are other syntaxes, whatever the word. There are other signatures that you can use. So if you don't have any dependencies, you can leave off that array, and it's smart enough under the hood to say, is this an array? Is this a function? It knows what to do.
Question on that real quick, just because I was looking at your starter. When I'll say that,
Go ahead.
view models, like if you look at welcome.js, or welcome the view model welcome.js, which is you're basically defining constructor there.
In the start kit, yeah.
I know in Require you can just return an object literal.
Yep.
Is that possible with that, or is this
That's the third syntax.
So is the constructor for this welcome.js, is that necessary, or is the fact that you're really just saying description, display name, and features with an array of strings? Could you just return an object literal for that, or is there a dependency on that constructor through Durandal?
Yeah. So it supports, I guess, two things that I can think of off the top of my head since you put me on the spot. So Durandal does two different things. If your view model is an object literal, then it uses that one every time. If you give it back a function, which is a constructor function, then it will actually new up that one every time. So if you have multiple instances of the same thing, different pieces of your application, or you want a new one every time, just use a constructor function, which is the syntax that we're about to do here.
So something like a contact us page where that thing hardly ever changes, contact us tab, probably just pass the object literal to it.
Maybe, depending on state. So if you're data binding back and forth, and contact us, people are writing emails, and it has a subject, and it has a, you might want to new up a new one each time.
Okay. It depends on how you want to manage this. So if you have an object literal, it's going to actually portray this context that the caller actually consumed it. But if you new it up, then you get your own context list inside of that required context. So that's what it's saying. If you want to save state on like emails or else a singleton or something like that, you can do that. Yeah. So if you don't need to new it up, then you can just do an object literal.
You don't want me to try to explain this, because I still know what it does, but I can't explain it. Actually, I haven't found anybody that explains the concept of this very, very well.
I'm actually working up to a meetup about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dude, I would love to hear that, because I know it, and I read the instruction, I read the explanations, and it's still
Is that a scope? Like the concept of scope?
scope and closures and this and what's this and
Well, it's
specific context.
more people coming from compiled languages
Yeah.
versus interpreted languages. So.
Yeah, because this in JavaScript means something completely different than it does in C#. Anyway, we won't go there. So, but what I'm doing here is I'm creating a constructor function, and I'm going to say this dot front heading equal to front heading. Come on, IntelliSense, don't let me down. Yay. This dot front equal to front. This dot back heading. Back heading. Okay. One more. Almost done. This dot back. And this is demo code, so don't give me grief. Demo code and production code tend to be different because you want your demo code to be simple enough for people to understand and not get bogged down in the details, but you want to collect enough that it is worth talking at and looking at. But so the key thing here is that card returns a constructor function, and logger, that's not logger, logger returns an object literal. And the other thing to notice here is that this guy can be optional when you don't have any dependent. Damn, go away. There we go. that guy can be optional when you don't have any dependencies. And the other thing that's really cool, let's do this, because I like this. I'm going to put it here. Not that it belongs in the services folder. It's not really a service. I'm going to do a config.js. This is the third syntax. So object literal, constructor function. We can define a module that all it is an object literal. So lots of flexibility there. So all we're doing here is passing in an object literal to define, and that object literal will get returned every time you need that module. So what we could do is we could say enable logger, true, and then like that. Okay, so now this is going to be like this config file that tech services, when they have problems in the field, they can go and say, hey, at least enable logging. Now we want to create a dependency on that within our logger. So here's now where we start to add dependencies. So now we're dependent on services/config. Once it's resolved that, it passes the config in here into our constructor function. And now, something else that I can do is turn logging on and off. So I can say if config dot enable logger now log, and if not, forget it. So hopefully that kind of ties together the idea of this is how we manage our dependencies, this is how we bring them into other modules, and so on. Let me save that. Man. So this is a Windows 8 VM running on my MacBook Pro. Usually the performance is better. Or maybe I'm just not usually standing in front of people waiting on things to load. That's not. Okay, so now it worked. So now we're up and running again. We were able to use the error messages and stuff in the console to debug things that went on. We were having problems, models that it couldn't find, things like that. I like it. I like working this way.
Would you mind showing us the main.js stuff? I think there's a require config where you define where services is, or is that all just bundled?
Yeah, we'll look at main. You can require. You can set up paths.
Yeah.
So like the plugins folder, so Durandal has a host of plugins. The router that we're using is a router plugin. The dialog is a plugin. First thing you have to do to use that is to go ahead and alias the folder.
Right. So if you wanted to, if you weren't able to bundle and minify your code for some reason, and you wanted to actually define your paths, you could do it here as well, right? So you could just define the relative paths within your web application, give it like a special alias.
Yeah.
So like jQuery version 1.2.3 or jQuery 3.1, you could just say jQuery and then pass in a reference to whatever version you're looking for.
Yeah. There's some neat things that you can do with this path configuration. I think one of the coolest things so we had this problem of, we actually had JavaScript tests, which is cool. That's not a problem in and of itself. We were using Jasmine to test our JavaScript. But when we bundled and minified our code, all our tests got bundled and minified, and we didn't want all our tests going out into production. So what we ended up doing was just creating a completely separate project in a completely different folder. The main application didn't know anything about it, but we had to test the code that was way over in this other application. So we just used paths to define app, and we said, hey, whenever we ask for app, go up a couple of levels, go down here. Here's where the app really is, and it worked really, really nice for testing. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because there's some really good stuff there. Let's see, 8:19. Man, we're having so much fun. We have so much to cover still. Can we skip the knockout demo? No. Okay. I'm going to do this knockout demo as quickly as possible, because it's a funny thing about Durandal. Because it's built on these other things, you got to be good at Require.js. You got to be good at knockout, reasonably good at jQuery. Once you have those types of things, all Durandal's doing is just tying together. It's giving you a workflow, it's giving you some composition, gives you some dialogue, gives you a bunch of sugar. on top of those things that makes it fun to work with. So stop talking and do a demo. So I'm gonna get jump. Jump is an alias that I created.
Were you using the scaffold then?
This is Git. So this is a Git repository,
actually have a
source
repository.
control. So I have a branch called Knockout, which is my Knockout demo, and I created this alias that jump, and it cleans it and removes all the other stuff that I did.
Thought you were using the alias for Yum or something.
No. So it's just Git. I love Git. I said Durandal changed my life. Git changed my life as well. Did I use Git?
Oh yeah.
Y'all
Haven't
Git?
figured it out yet.
Haven't figured it out yet. Yeah. So I had the benefit of working with the guy that was using it. So we actually use SVN at my client. But there's the Git SVN bridge. So all day I'm happy in Git, creating my branches, merging things, have this awesome workflow. And then when I get ready to push, I just do a commit to SVN and push it straight out of Git. And so
When
they
you say
make
Git SVN bridge, it's just taking the whole, using the nomenclature from SVN and doing what you're
the
expecting.
bridge knows how to talk to SVN. So I talk Git, it talks SVN, and it works really well. You can do the same thing for TFS. There's a Git TFS bridge. So everybody else can be using TFS and they can be tied to source control and miserable. You can have freedom. Freedom is really what Git's all about. And Texas is about freedom. So Git, Texas, guns, and all that fun stuff. Talking too much. Demo. Yeah, I was afraid of that. Come on. Give me my demo. Yay, now we're good. Okay. So I'm going to run this demo similar to the last one. It's gonna succeed. It's not gonna fail. But we're gonna see that there are some problems that we're gonna have to fix. And so we're gonna use knockout binding to fix those. I have some slides on knockout, but I skipped those. Their website is awesome. They were one of the first websites to do that whole, hey, while you're on our website, why don't you learn our stuff? And you can practice the tutorials and things right there. So highly recommend that. So card decks go here. So we need to data bind our list of card decks for our application. No errors, everything looks good. So I think that's in a file called libraries. Library. So let's go, not that one. I do that quite often, actually. There we go. Library.html. Okay, so all this is doing is just showing static content at this point. When you're doing knockout, I guess the gist of it, like in a nutshell, knockout in a nutshell is data-bind equals. So Require.js did data-main to send us to our main page. Knockout does data-bind. And with the data-bind, we can bind elements in our UI to things that are in our view model, which is behind us. So I want to do one of my favorite. I love the for each binding. The for each binding takes an array of data and then just repeats it over and over again. So I'm going to create a bunch of list items here just based on this one little template that we have. So, but now we got to go see what can we bind to. So this probably looks familiar by this point. We've done enough Require.js that this is a module. So all our view models are just Require.js modules, AMD modules. I'm dependent on a few things. I'm dependent on the router. I'm dependent on this card data thing. I'm dependent on a module that keeps track of the selected deck. When those things are resolved and ready to go, it passes them in as parameters, and we're good to go. So it returns an object literal, and this object literal, these are all the things that I can interact with. Anything that's returned here, all the things that I can bind to on my UI. And so one of the things here is this dex, and dex is just a string array. So I'm going to for each dex. So that's an array of strings that defines all the dex that I have. So now, if we refresh, better. So we at least have 4 dex, but our text is not correct. So let's come down here, and let's do data-bind. And we are going to use a text binding. Now, we come up against something interesting at this point. It's a string array. So there's no properties or anything that we can reference. So we have this array of strings, we're looping over it, we're creating this list item. To reference that, in this instance, $.data. That's Knockout's way of saying that's the current instance of what we're iterating over. If it was like an object that had properties, like if I had an array of objects, then I could just say I had an array of people. I could here just say first name, last name, those types of things. But when it's a string array, use $.data or $.data. Yeah.
If I by chance need my current index, can I get a handle on that?
Say that again?
If I by chance needed my current index as I'm iterating through with the for each, can I get a handle on that with like $index or something like that? Does it provide anything?
It is the thing itself. So when we're iterating over it, I mean, index like 1, 2.
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4.
I don't know, never tried it. It's a good question. I've never needed it though.
Yeah, it's very rarely useful.
Because when we're iterating over the object itself. So you don't need you don't necessarily need an index to go look it up because you've already got an instance of it.
But you may want to reference that index somehow.
So rather than have like some kind of iterator value that you add to as you cycle through it, check for writing that value. It would be nice to know like what is my index on the fly rather than the workaround.
Yeah, I've never tried it. Maybe there's a way. You'd have to dig down, knock deeper. So that is knockout specific. So
That
you would have to go to what?
The binding part you're
Yes,
showing?
yes.
Okay.
So this is all knockout. Data-bind is all completely knockout. The text binding, we're going to see a click binding, the for each binding. Those are all things that knockout provides for us.
And the $data is really an object, right? You can reference fields within it and so on.
It's the token that they give us for the current iteration of thing.
There's actually 3. There's a $data,
So what does deck return?
He just ruined my demo completely.
Sorry.
Completely just ruined it because I was going to go there, but now I can't.
That's what I mean.
I'm kidding.
I said it.
I'm teasing. So we saw that now that we have $.data, we refresh our page and we're actually getting the current string that we're bound over, but it doesn't do anything yet. It's not. I click on them, it doesn't take us to. So what we need to do is have another event. So you can bind to multiple things. So you can have a text binding. I'm going to use a click binding. Click binding is good. It's the action that it's going to take. So we go look at our view model. Deck selected. So there's a function here called deck selected. It's going to set the selected deck and it's going to use the router to navigate us over to our cards page. So let's do a click binding to deck selected. And we're going to run it. And it's going to fail. And so start thinking to ourselves, why did it fail? So we come down here, it says unable to parse bindings. So I wanted this to fail on purpose because I wanted you guys to see that it really does, when you have a problem, just read the console. Because it really does tell you, for the most part, what's going on. So it says, hey, deck selected is not defined. But we know it's defined because we were just looking at it. So go look at our view model. There it is, deck selected. So what's our problem? Our problem is that what we're for eaching over is a string. And so when we try to call deck selected on a string, get back over there to it, it doesn't exist. What we have to do is we have to go up a level. And so that's what you were just talking about right there. $.parent. That takes us up to the parent of the object that we're currently iterating over. Or if you want to go all the way to the top, like you said, you can do $.root. Or if you're in an unfortunate situation where you have multiple for eaches, which I've been in before, where you're for eaching over a thing and you've got sub for eaches, there's actually an array where you can say parent 0, parent 1, parent 2. Once you get to that point, you got to start asking yourself, did I make a mistake somewhere along the way that forces me to call parent 3 dot look? Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back. I was pretty sure I'd used it before, but I just looked it up. So you can do $index
Oh,
to
nice.
get the current position of your array.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Appreciate you looking that up. All right. So now that we've done that, we've told it, hey, go up to the parent and call that function on the parent. Now it's going to set our current deck that we've selected, and it's going to navigate us to our page.
So you are not using observables for this deck card.
Not here. Not here. Well, okay. Observable, trick question. Selected deck. Set selected deck. I think if we go to this thing called selected deck, he's in charge of keeping up with which deck did we select. He also does some stuff with random, because if you've got random selected, you got to go give them a different card, you know? So this guy's just responsible for tracking that. He has a KO observable, knockout observable, for the kind of card ID, for the selected deck name. All these things are observables. So, interestingly enough, the people that don't like Durandal, for the most part, the reason they don't like Durandal is because they don't like knockout. And the reason they don't like knockout is because they don't like observables. Have you heard of observable hell? Right. So there's, back in the day we had DLL hell. Now people complain about observable hell. And the reason they do that is because if you want to data bind with knockout, it's got to be observable to go two-way data binding. You can do one way with just plain JavaScript objects. So I can have a list, I can load that list, but then if I want to change the list in my JavaScript and have the view update, it's got to be observable at that point. Why do I bring up observable hell? Well, the reason I bring that up is because one of the things that Durandal does is it has an observable plugin. And I think the observable plugin is brilliant. It has its limitations, and I'm still trying to figure out what those limitations are. I bump up against them every now and then. But you don't have to use observables anymore. So as long as you're using the plugin, before it binds your page, it says, what are all my properties? And if it has a property, it turns it into an observable. So then you can just have back to plain old JavaScript objects, but still get data binding from your JavaScript to your view, back from your view.
It's very AngularJS-ish.
That part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angular is pretty much crazy with observable pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. So under the hood, there's a couple of things you have to know. Depends on what you have to support. So thanks for bringing up Angular. Everybody always brings up Angular. Oh, you're doing Durandal. What do you think about Angular? This is always the first thing that somebody says. Where's I going with this? Observables, Angular, Durandal. Okay. So within the ECMAScript 5 stuff, I'm not an ECMAScript 5 expert, so don't question me beyond this point. But so with ECMAScript 5, we start to get getters and setters, stuff like that with JavaScript. So if your browser supports ECMAScript 5 and getters and setters and things like that, which is IE9 and above, then you can use the observable plugin with knockout and not have to do observables anymore, which is kind of a nice thing. If you, unfortunately, have to support IE7, 6, 8, it's not going to work. So at that point, you should quit your job. Matrix is hiring front-end web developers. Proving is hiring front-end web developers. Yeah, just quit your job. No. Well, maybe. I actually quit a job because they made me support IE6. And I was like, life is too short to support IE6. I mean, really. But back to this ECMAScript 5 thing. So that's one of the limitations with Angular. So Angular does pretty nice from IE9 and up. Does fine on Chrome and Safari and those things. But if you have to support older browsers, Angular is probably not going to work for you. If it does work, like even back to IE7 and stuff, it's going to be troublesome. So Durandal actually will go all the way back to IE6, but you can't use the observable plugin because it relies on those getters and setters. So that's always, whenever somebody says, what front-end framework should I use to do single-page apps, that's always the first question. What do you have to support? And if you have to support anything before IE9, then Durandal's probably one of the only options. Backbone, do Backbone if you like stuff like that. Way off topic. Did you have a question that I haven't answered?
No, it's all good.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Knockout is deep. So go to their website. Check out their stuff. Let me find my slideshow again. There was the knockout slides. Skip that. Cool. Yeah, we don't have any more slides. So let's do the Durandal portion of this. So, interestingly enough, one of my favorite things about Durandal, I'll pull up my Durandal presentation here. My So, one of my favorite things about Durandal, and really the reason that I think it's brilliant, is this idea of composition. So, composition, a couple of different things where you see composition. You see composition in the Require.js modules. So, the Require.js modules, if you follow a single responsibility, which you should to a certain extent until it gets painful, single responsibility, you can compose functionality in one module just based on the things that it's dependent on. So, like for example, I was talking about my selected vehicles. Well, I gave this module over here the responsibility for tracking selected vehicles that I wanted to view video on, and then I just composed that into my view models. So any view model that needs to know about selected vehicles, I compose that in. So you've got composition on the JavaScript level, which is not too surprising because we see composition patterns and things like that in code all the time. But the part that I think is really cool is the view composition. And so view composition is the idea of saying, I have this little piece of a view here, it's got its own view model. I have a little piece of a view here, it has its own view model. A little piece over here, a little piece over here. Depending on how complicated your UI is, develop those independently and then use composition to compose them back together onto a single page. And that is huge. That is amazing, especially as far as cleaning up your UI code, avoiding code duplication. I love it. So we had this "Are you still watching?" timer, so we're streaming live video over 3G and 4G cellular networks. One of the things that they were scared of is that people will pull it up and just keep streaming. Maybe they go out to lunch, maybe they leave overnight, leave stuff streaming. So they wanted this "Are you still watching?" feature. So depending on what page they were on, they got like 30 minutes of streaming, and then they had to click a button to continue, or we were going to disconnect them. That way they didn't get these huge cellular bills. But I needed that same timer on multiple pages. So I was able to create it once, and then use this composition feature that we're about to talk about to use it on my vehicles page and use it on the streaming page. Anywhere that I needed that timer, I was able to use that code. So that was actually pretty cool for code reuse, but that's really the only time I've used composition for code reuse. Usually I use composition for architectural purposes. When I get nervous when my JavaScript gets over 100 lines in a module, so I'm like, what's really going on here? Do I really need this anything more than 100 lines? If not, then you can start to pull those things out. So, with all that being said, let's run this and look at it. Make sure we're in a good state here. Because what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to split up the card. So the card has the navigation controls, it has the card body, and it has the card footer. And so we're going to try to split that card up. Let's look at that card. So here's our navigation controls. Here is what I'm calling the card body. And then I'm calling this part down here the footer. And the main thing that the footer does is allow you to select random cards, turn that on and off. So what we want to do is we want to try to split these up into different files. Now, caveat, this is demo code. And what I mean by that is this code is not complex enough to need to be split up. So split up at your own discretion. But we did have, so we had this video search page where just the left-hand column alone was like 500 lines of JavaScript, just that one left-hand column, because it was all these nested, I need to search by officer, I need to search by car, I need to search by vehicle ID. Well, when I click this, I get a drop-down list here, and it was lots of JavaScript, lots of HTML. And so I was like, wow, okay, what we need to do is we need to isolate that guy into its own view and view model, and its only responsibility is for searching vehicles. That's all it does. We did that, pulled all that code out, then composed it back in. So let's do a little bit of composition now that we're sure that everything's up and running. I knew we would be short on time by the time we got to this point, so I helped us out a little bit by cards.html. So here's all the HTML for the card. This div right here has the previous buttons, this has the content, the body content, and then we got the footer down here. So what we want to do is we want to split this up. We want to say, you know what, split those out into their own file. So if we look at the card header, I already did that work for us. JavaScript, no, HTML. Card header, there we go. So this is the only HTML that we have that pertains to just that navigation and those two buttons out there. I put it in its own view by itself. And then I come up here and I create a view model. This view model is dedicated just to those two buttons, just to that one div, and it's specifically bound just to that point. So what Durandal does is it says, hey, what are all my views and view models that I need for this page? Goes and finds them all, binds them together, inserts them into the DOM at the same place. So you get some really, really nice architecture. So there's my card header. Let's look at the card body. So here's the body. This is just the code for activating the card, the deck name, flipping the card counts, things like that. Just anything that just that one little portion needs. So to prove to you guys how this works, and to kind of demonstrate to you guys how this works, I want to come over to my card HTML page. And let's delete this guy. We don't need this anymore. Our goal is to get rid of that HTML and then just compose it in. So this guy right here, this is the knockout. Let me see if I can say this right. This is the knockout comment syntax. So where I was doing data-bind for each on an element, you can do that to do your composition, or you can use this comment syntax, which is really handy. I have trouble typing it, so I created a snippet for it. So what we actually want to bring in here is our card header. So what is this doing? Here's the important part. That other stuff is just the comment syntax that Knockout is best. And this is not Durandal. Again, this is Knockout and how Knockout does these things. Durandal does, though, it did create this compose binding. So what this is saying is it's saying go use the compose binding to compose the card header into this section of my page. So it's going to go to the view models folder. It's going to find my card header JavaScript. Then it's going to go find the view. It's going to bind them together. It's going to insert them into the DOM. This fixed my other frustration with jQueryMobile. When I started doing jQueryMobile, and I finally got my app to work, my view models were huge. So everything that was going on was in this one view model, because I kind of only got one chance to bind it. So what I was trying to do is say, how can I have multiple view models bound to small pieces of my UI? And I was trying to do that by hand using Knockout and those types of things. It was a real pain, and especially hard to then clean up when you were changing pages. But with Durandal, using this this composition binding, it makes it really simple. You don't even have to think about it. When I say you don't have to think about it, you don't have to think of how is the knockout binding accomplished? How's that inserted to the DOM? It handles it for you. So this should compose in our header. So now let's get rid of our body.
I have a question before you
Yep.
go too far with this. Is the dependency on the view model for the, let's just say this is your wrapping page, is that what do you have to declare those dependencies for the card header view model and the card footer and card body view models, or does this compose tag automatically kind of say you're utilizing these view templates, therefore bringing those view models?
Yeah, so that's one of the very, very powerful things that Durandal does. Is you can have one view with n number of view models that are composed on top of that single view, or you can create views and view model pairs for each one of those. Does that answer your question?
With your first statement, or those two possibilities, is that via the require module defined through the dependency array?
So how does it know? Basically, it's asking like if you have the view model and view with the same name, it knows that it matches there. But if you have one view and you have multiple view models, so how will the view know which one to get to?
Here we go.
Or how does it know?
That was not the button I wanted. Okay. This code, not guaranteed to compile, but here's the gist of what you're talking about. So in this first example, we said, go get the card header object. So in that example, it expects to find the view model and the view and bind them together. Now, we can do something different. Let's get rid of this. This is a different syntax. This is a more advanced syntax where we can do this object literal thing in here. And then inside here, we can say my view lives here, and my view model so some other view model. So you can specify those independently, or so that's one syntax.
Can you skip the view in that?
You cannot skip the view.
So if you're using this as your view, cards.html as your view, and you have multiple view models for it, then how do you tie them together?
The other thing I can do is I can say view dot some other HTML. So that guy is just going to say, hey, whatever view model that cards.html has, I'm just going to bind myself to that. So you can specify them individually. You can specify just the view by itself, or you can specify the pair. So there's quite a bit of flexibility there.
So it's just an inheriting the data from the parent view that it's
Yes.
composed on.
Yeah, exactly.
So so if you looked at the markup of your live example, is
Mhm.
Compose actually adding an ID to that element that is binding to? Because it looks like what's happening is it's actually apply bindings to a view model that's associated with an ID, and then using the template binding, which is a built-in knockout comment markup, together, so you don't have to put it in two places.
Let's go look at it.
Because I noticed you didn't have apply bindings anywhere.
No, you never have to call apply binding. So that's kind of where I said, if you accept the conventions that Durandal gives you,
Right. No, it is easier.
it just
For
gets
sure.
out of the way, so you never have to bother with apply bindings.
Can you compose in a variable view? Like transfer?
Yes! Oh my gosh, that is brilliant. And yes, so I have this thing that I'm working on. It's not ready yet. I'm not sure what it's going to end up being. I see it being, so Durandal has plugins, widgets, and then just modules. So I don't know if it's going to be my CRUD widget or my CRUD plugin or what. But basically I'm working on this CRUD thing that is going to allow me to do CRUD operations. Create, read, update, and delete on a web API and use the same view and view model over and over and over again, just based on that. And the reason I say that is because you can, instead of, let's do a third one here. Let's do a third syntax. So these have all been strings, where I was passing in specific strings. I can say selected view. So this is an object. It's going to go find the property on my view model called selected view, and that property is going to be an observable. And when I say show me the create view, I get the create. When I say show me the update view, I get the update. And it dynamically just switches those out. All you've got to do is switch those. And yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. Because we have this search page in the other project that we're working on, which is like, you know, most basically, maybe I just want to search for my vehicle and see the recording events. So there's like these big pretty icons, you know, in the list. But then there are the more power users that say, no, I need more data. I want to not just see the big pretty icons, I want to see a different view, which gives me the date that the video was recorded and who the officer was, all those kinds of things. So our UX designer actually created 4 different views bound to the same data. And the most detailed one is a data grid, you know, that has filtering and sorting and stuff. So using that, we can use that dynamic view, which is on our view model, to just change views. You know, they click a different view, update the view. It binds a completely different set of HTML to our view model. It's really awesome.
I think I was able to reform my original question to kind of solve all of this. What is, after you've inserted these comments that are specific to knockout, cleared out your actual HTML, we're going to be left with a blank section tag in terms of DOM.
Yes.
Until it's run. What does the card view model look like then?
Exactly, and I wanted to see that.
Yeah, let's finish out this and we'll go look at it.
Okay.
Because what you're going to see is you're going to see when it renders your HTML in the DOM, you're going to see your comment, and then you're going to see whatever was being composed in.
I'm talking about the view model.
The view model, so cards.js file.
Oh, okay. let's finish doing what we were doing here. So we want to bring in the card header. We want to bring in the card body. We want to bring in the card footer. So that I don't have a demo fail. Yes, it's plural. I don't know why I made it plural, but I did. So it's cards header, cards body, cards footer. And now, let me get rid of all this. So like you said, now we have this empty section with these 4 things that we're composing in. Now all we have to do is go over to our cards JavaScript. So all this other stuff we don't need anymore. We don't need that, need that, need that. Let's delete all of that. Only thing we're going to leave is our lifecycle event. So I talked about at one point that we get to plug into the lifecycle. So one of the things that it gives us is attached. So the attached function, the attached event that you can plug into in the lifecycle is basically, I've already gotten the view, I've already gotten the view model, I bound them together, I've inserted them into the DOM, and it's attached to the DOM. So now I can start monkeying with the DOM. I can wire up jQuery event handlers and things like that. Okay.
So you don't need a comma, line 8.
Yeah.
What, line 8?
Line 8 you don't need.
Thank you. Okay. So all that went away. We took out all that JavaScript, and what we did was we just moved it out into the body, footer, and header. So all the JavaScript that used to be in that other file is now over here, but only the pieces that we need for that section of the DOM. Now, if I did that right, we did a lot of talking along the way. Let's see if it works. It looks like it works.
So how does it know to attach the view model to the, commented in card sections, the header, footer, the body? Like, is that all knockout magic? Is that all Durandal magic?
That is Durandal magic. So, if you go look at the knockout documentation, you will not see a binding called compose. Durandal created that binding called compose. Now, tell me your name again? Benita. So, your question was on custom bindings. Yes. How do you create custom bindings?
Yes.
Durandal has created a couple of custom bindings for us, and one of those custom bindings is the compose one. It knows how, when you call that binding, it takes in whatever parameters we give it. We give it a .html file, it's going to go find that and bring it in. We give it a reference to an object, it's going to go find that object, find its view, bring those in. It's going to call knockout apply bindings. It's going to call apply bindings, and then it's going to insert them into the DOM. So that is one of the biggest things that Durandal does for us.
And how does that affect the compile and uglify aspect of things? Because it seems like that's done at runtime.
That part is done at runtime. So yeah, this is all happening in JavaScript runtime behind the scenes.
Well, how do you take that? Will Require.js or RJS, whatever, be able to compile to a single JavaScript file and still function correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So when it bundles and minifies, it goes and says, what are all my modules that I know about? What are all the dependencies? So it actually goes and reads the modules, and it executes some code, and it finds all the dependencies that they're dependent on, goes and finds all of those, brings them in, and then Durandal does one change to the text plugin. I don't know what that change is, that R.js uses. But it brings in all these little files
for it.
So Durandal actually took these composers and made it amenable to R.js. So R.js still works as is, but Durandal did something to kind of massage it, so it introduced some new stuff.
It uses knockout, so that part doesn't really have much to do with R.js except for the bundling notification.
R.js normally removes comments, right?
Maybe that's what Durandal did to it.
It probably made it, probably modified.
Because there was one little change that they had to make, and I haven't gone in to see what that one little change is.
Probably that.
Yeah, to keep the comment syntax. That makes sense. Because you wouldn't want it to strip out your...
The text change on Durandal, was that I18N by chance?
I'm sorry.
I18N, internationalization. So
I have no idea.
yeah, so typically in the structure, if you set up like a resource directory set up like EMUS.
Yeah.
And it automatically propagates through that literal object and replaces the text with the internationalized version.
That's more of a server-side thing, right?
No, it's
Client-side?
It can be server-side, but I've done it client-side with knockout with Require I18N plugin. So if it does that, that's really cool.
I don't-
I'll have to look at it and see.
Yeah. So I've never had to do that on the client side. I've done that with server-side stuff.
We don't handle cops like Russia. So. Yes.
Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Well.
but not on the web. So that was a
Okay.
that was a .NET application with the Saudi Arabia thing. They tried to sell it to South Africa, but we didn't offer bribes, so we lost the contract for South Africa. And the Canadian Mounted Police, which I wanted to see how they mounted our cameras on their horses, but
Some really good stabilization on that one.
They don't use horses anymore, but they're still called the Canadian Mounted Police.
Go pros.
Okay, so let's look at this. So let's inspect our HTML and what I would expect to see. So here's our comment, and then below that is the
Is the router also custom binding thing?
comment router. Oh, that's router. That's not even right. Okay, router's the other one. Sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. Router is the other one. So router is the one that when we click on our things across the top,
Right.
it selects a different route and sends us to it. So, sorry, let me see if I can better navigate.
Don't you have to click into one?
Yeah. Somehow I'm lost here in the HTML. Maybe I'm too deep into it. Let me go up. Container.fluid. It's here. We can see it. It's got to be here.
No, I think it's right. You have to click on one of them to see the pulled in.
One of these guys.
Yeah. Because then we get to see the header, footers.
Oh! It's been a long day. I got up at 5 this morning. I was on the wrong page. You were trying to tell me and I just wasn't listening. Here we go. This is what I expected to see. Okay, so there's the router. Underneath that is the compose. So here we composed in our header. And expand that. I don't even see data dash view. Okay, so it added the data dash view to keep track of it. So I think you, when you guys were asking does it insert stuff in there, it added a data dash view attribute with the, so that it can go pull those out later on. So interesting stuff. The composition is so powerful. The ability and the things that it can find. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's almost 9 o'clock. So, a couple of things to wrap up. It can generate views dynamically on the fly. So, right now we have a view and we have a view model object. Well, you can get rid of the view. This is stuff for you to go research on your own. So you can get rid of the view completely and just have your view model generate that view on the fly, which is kind of trippy. That's how the dialog plugin works. It just generates that dialog on the fly. I'm going to use that functionality for my CRUD plugin that I was talking about because I want to give my CRUD plugin an object and have it use JavaScript to reflect over that object and create my UI and just return it so that I don't have to do CRUD UI stuff anymore. That's some stuff that I'm working on. What else? Let me check my notes. I think that's it. That's probably good enough. Durandal is fun and it's kind of deep and there's so much to pack into a presentation. So I did a section on lunch and learns at our work last month, and the first hour and a half, all we covered was Require.js. So you can go deep into that. The next one, all we covered was Knockout. Third one, we just covered basic Durandal, and then the fourth one, which is where some really fun stuff is the plugins. So we went down deep into the composition plugin, the router plugin, the observable plugin, the dialog plugin. We went way down deep into a lot of those. So, questions?
So can you take like 2 minutes to show us how you do minimizing using Visual Studio? If we just talk through it outside.
Yeah, I need to pull it up. It's in a different project. It's actually in my work project. So we'll pull that up. Yeah, it's 9 o'clock. We should probably let you guys go. thank you for listening to me talk about JavaScript and for being passionate about JavaScript and HTML5. And if you're looking for a job, or you know somebody who's looking for a job, Matrix needs a front-end web developer. They've got the job descriptions out there. Now, I work for Improving Enterprises. We also need a front-end web developer. So, yeah, take your pick. You like Matrix, you like Improving, or do you know somebody? Because we also need Java developers and C# developers and yeah, all sorts of stuff. The job market is rich. Or if they make you support HTML5 at your, Internet Explorer 6 at your current job, come talk to Matrix, and we'll try to hook you up with the
Don't kill yourself.
better client.
You should just start like a bidding thing. You know, everybody leaves a card how much money they want to make on the table, and highest bidder takes it.
There is, and underemployed. If you're underemployed, there are, dude. So one of the guys, I know a guy that quit his job and he got like a $30,000 pay raise at some other company. I wouldn't have given him a $30,000 pay raise, but that company thought that he deserved it, so they did. But yeah, the job market out there is pretty crazy right now. Pretty competitive. So, all right, I'll let y'all go. I'll pull up this application so that we can talk. Did you have anything?